Hey everyone, my name is Zane Keller. I'm the head of investor relations at Affirm Holdings. I'm also the VP of sponsorships for the Nero San Francisco chapter. As many of you, we're actually in the process of merging the San Francisco and San Jose chapters. And so the combined chapter will be called the Neri Bay Area, and that's expected to go into effect in January of 2026. So we look forward to combining the two, and that's going to allow us to host more events, bigger events, and get in great sponsors like Irwin. Speaking of Irwin, we have with us today Mark Fasken, who was one of the original co-founders of Irwin. Irwin's since been acquired by FactSet, as many of you, but we're very excited and thankful that they are sponsors of ours, and we look forward to continuing to sponsor with them for many years to come. With that, I think I will hand it over to Mark, and he will begin with some opening remarks. Mark, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Zane. Appreciate it. And as Zane said, everybody, apologies for being a little bit tardy on the start of this webinar. We were just, as for anybody who's hosted a Zoom webinar, which is probably many of you, you're like always scrambling in the background, trying to get people in and promoting people after you start the webinar and whatnot. And so that's really what we've been doing in the background. But we're really excited to get this started. And so I really want to jump right into some of the questions. And as you all know, the purpose of today's webinar is really to talk about jobs to be done in IR and how you can use AI in your day-to-day activities. And this has been a hot topic for over a year now. And I'm really hoping that we can share some really actionable insights with you all today. We've got an awesome panel of folks here. We're going to skip the introductions because I'm assuming that most of you have already gone through and looked at the website. And I really want to focus on just getting into the questions. And so I'm going to ask a sort of general question to start off. And maybe Lex, we can start with you and then we can go from over to Tim and then over to Justin. For IR teams that haven't yet begun using AI, where should they start? Like, where is the best place for you to begin as an IRO? And Lex, I'll hit it off to you.
Thanks, Mark. I would say first, what is your company already doing? Chances are there's something AI happening in your company. So are there secure tools you can tap into, LLMs that you have access to, be it ChatGPT, be it through Copilot or whatever your pick your poison provider? And then the other thing I would say is also your other tools and platforms that you're already using. There's a lot of AI built into existing IR platforms you're probably using. So I'd start with looking at those two. And then if your company really hasn't done a lot yet, what can you do just from a personal account with non-sensitive information? At least get comfortable with the LLMs and start exploring.
Great. Thanks. Tim?
Yeah, Mark, I would say start small and build confidence, right? And there's plenty of value that agents and AI are delivering today. And one use case I love is look at a prior transcript. And if there was some negative sentiment on that transcript, it's public information, put it into ChatGPT, Copilot. You can use FactSet for this and ask AI to come back with suggestions on how it can be more positive. I think that's just a great use case to get started. But key takeaway, start small, build confidence, and then go from there.
Thanks. Justin?
I really think it is case dependent on the organization, the depth and breadth of the portfolio, the size of the company, and really how complex the story and the narrative is that would determine whether you need to leverage a tool that has AI level sophistication and funding and those types of things that requires a lot of development to sustain the tool over time and to iterate. I agree with what was said. I think you do need to start small just to start to gain confidence and build that sort of familiarity with the team and with leadership, that the tool can be trusted, and given that there are hallucinations. And then it just really depends on whether the company wants to develop the tool in-house only, leveraging all of the information that is fed to it, as opposed to having an open system that relies on essentially everything in the World Wide Web. Pfizer does it using the former. We have a closed environment and we have a budget and a very sophisticated AI digital development team that supports the IR team's development efforts and our investor engagement modeler. So it really just depends. But again, it starts with trust and going from there.
Thank you. Last but not least, Michael.
Yeah, gladly got promoted a little bit after your intro, but I'm happy to be here. Yeah, besides starting small and using it maybe for your own personal use, looking up recipes and planning out a trip or something like that, go to your vendors and ask them what they're doing. All the CRM providers are doing something with AI. the Alpha Senses of the world, the Quarters. They can all give you demos on how to leverage their platforms, but that's the easiest thing to leverage is your current portfolio of services and people around you.
It's great. And Justin, maybe I'll kick this one off with you because you were talking about the sort of investor engagement modeler, and we'll get into that a little bit in more detail. But on our prep call, some of you were talking about the various ways that you're using investor or AI and investor relations. And I think one thing that a lot of people talk about is the sensitive information, right? And how do you think about setting up yourself, setting up your team so that you can use AI without concerns around sensitive information, ensuring that you have all the right sort of guardrails in place? So maybe we'll start with you, Justin. We can go down the line.
When you have a closed environment, which is the sort of approach that we've taken, you can control the information that is fed into the machine. Essentially, there are situations where, say, if you're working with a 200-page messaging document, a Bible, so to speak, going into an earnings call, for instance, there's going to be a litany of information in there that is information that is confidential, you cannot disclose, but is also helpful to include in those prep documents for general awareness internally. So we have found a way to color code all of those types of information so that and program the tool to avoid pulling all that information into the tools that we leverage, into the outputs. And for instance, when we're using, say, what is a newer output of the tool called Rapid Q&A, where it's an interface of this IEN tool where we can type a prompt in during a real-time conversation we're having, say, at a conference with a table, say, with 5 to 10 investors sitting before us, and we're rapidly responding to questions. We can type in a prompt and within 5 seconds have the answer basically handed to us on a platter. And it doesn't include any of that sensitive information. So really having a controlled environment can help with that, where you feed all the press releases, the key messages and Q&A documents, the sell side reports, all the content that you want to scrutinize and have AI evaluate and tee up for you. That is one way to do it. And the other is to then just earmark the information specifically so that AI avoids pulling it.
Justin, maybe while we're on you, if you could just expand on the rapid Q&A a little bit, because I do think it's a really interesting use case for IROs. And just at a high level, my understanding of it has been that you have this internal AI tool, you've fed in a bunch of your company information. When you just said it's sell side research and Q&A documents and whatnot, I assume is that there's also internal documentation that is non-public, and all that information is being used to help your team answer investor Q&A in real time. And is that being used like at a conference in any investor engagement, or is it really just for the earnings call? I think Justin is frozen. Let's give him a second. Maybe we'll have to come back to him in a moment.
Zoom gets us again.
Yeah, that's
Deep
okay.
in thought, that's all.
We can roll with it. Maybe Lex will go over to you then next. Justin gets himself unfrozen. You talked a fair bit about how Salesforce is using AI tools, particularly some Google tools. And so I'd love to hear how you think about sensitive information and safety.
Yeah, so we are lucky that we also operate in a controlled environment. So as you said, we use Google Suite. And so that means we have access to things like tools like Gemini and Notebook LM. And so I know I can put anything confidential in there and there is a trust layer. It's not going to get out there publicly. Others in the company can't see what I'm putting in there unless I'm explicitly sharing it with them. So that's given us a lot of confidence and made it really easy, both with the Gemini tools as well as when we use our internal Agentforce tools, Slack tools, whatever the case may be. I will say, if your company happens to not have that type of controlled environment, there is still a lot of value you can get from AI. When you think about even where we started was just like the press releases of peers and looking at the research, like there's a lot of long information, big PDF files that we ingest as IROs. And so even getting that summarization, you can get a lot of value from public information.
Totally agree. Michael?
So yeah, we have the Microsoft Copilot security agreement. Obviously, we're not 100% sure that nothing will ever get out. You at least have their surety that it won't. So I guess you could, at this point, take it for what they say. But I find that I'm typically using it more for public documents anyway, and reviewing the peer transcripts over kind of internal analysis at this point. But
Great.
that's the tough part with security is they say it's secure, but everything was secure until it got hacked.
Absolutely.
There's always some layer of risk that you're putting on there.
For sure. And Tim, I know at FactSet, we're working with thousands of companies who are using our AI tools as well as other AI tools, whether it's Copilot or Google or whatever. And what are you hearing from IROs and how they're thinking about security and using these solutions?
Yeah. FactSet takes security extremely seriously. And at this point, to be perfectly frank, security is turning into table stakes. At this point, all the big vendors are using private instances of models. All inputs are anonymized. We're not training any models utilizing any client data. So you should definitely feel comfortable utilizing FactSet for this analysis. But ideally, you need to work with your digital team as well. And I would say the same for a lot of the big AI providers. There's a lot at stake. And so security is extremely important for them. I guess just one public service announcement would be, it's fine to use enterprise licenses, but I would just be careful using any private instances of AI applications. I wouldn't expect anything serious to happen, but definitely lean more towards enterprise and pro over the private ones.
Okay. All right, great. And so maybe just getting a little bit more focused and trying to get into some of the specific use cases. Lex, I'd love to jump over to you. We'd love to just talk a little bit more about the AI use cases that have delivered the most value for you and your team. And if you, to the best of your abilities, breaking that down, what were you doing before? What are you doing now? What are some of the common things a lot of people on this call are probably doing that they could automate or just make easier for themselves?
Yeah, so I think you're going to hear a lot from others in the panel about how you've automated the earnings prep process, peer summaries, all of that. I use AI every day for summarization and to make my life easier. But I think relevant for this group, I would flag Notebook LM is a really powerful tool within Google Suite that we've launched. And we were actually introduced to it by our COFO, who was on the board of Google. And it was before she started. She wanted information about the company. And she said, hey, can you just put a bunch of publicly available stuff on this Notebook LM? And I hadn't used it before. And I think of it as this supercharged shared drive. You can add up to 300 sources. And what I really like about it is it's then becomes closed source. Of one of the biggest challenges that we experience with AI is the hallucination. So it'll tell me some company reported EPS of X, and that number's not actually right. And so when you have this closed source, you know you're getting accurate responses. And then another feature within that, so we use that and throughout the process of just educating executives, they all, every quarter, when you're heading into earnings for earnings prep, you will get access to the relevant Notebook LM of the latest materials from peers, from Salesforce. Think of it from our Q&A prep doc, our draft earnings release. And so they can ask questions. We ask it questions to get advice on how we should be prepared for Q&A based on what sell side has been seeing. So this supercharged share drive has been really impactful for us. And then maybe my favorite use case of it is I'm not based in San Francisco. I travel for all earnings and things. And so you actually can generate podcasts with the Notebook LM. And so I found that incredibly helpful when I'm on the plane. I'll certainly do it for an earnings, but even as random things come up, maybe there's an acquisition and I need to learn quickly about a company, just throw in some quick docs and it gives me this really easy to listen to podcast.
Awesome. Okay. The Notebook LM fans out there. Lex, one question for you. Justin earlier was talking about how they've built this sort of internal AI tool and they load all the information into it and they're doing Q&A and whatnot. Like, is that something that you could theoretically do with Notebook LM? You don't necessarily need like your IT team to set it up for you.
Yeah, we certainly think about it as a very quick DIY Q&A tool. We'll ask it what type of questions we should expect on the earnings, and we've got all the peers in there, and it'll say, oh, based on what we've seen on peers, here are the questions you're likely to get. And then similarly, maybe we're prepping for a webcast and we want to place questions that we can ask an exec and, hey, what are good questions? And so we use it a lot for Q&A prep for sure.
Okay. All right. Great. Justin, welcome back. Well, I'm going to go over to you next while the Wi-Fi is working. You talked about the rapid Q&A, another tool that your team has built internally is really focused on investor sentiment and scoring investor sentiment. Can you walk us through that investor sentiment scoring tool and how that's changed your team's approach to investor communications?
Yeah, so this is specifically focused on sell side information, right? So all the sell side reports that we get, say, following an earnings call. But then you think about it, if you're feeding in a sell side note into the AI tool, into the IAM tool, every note has these disclaimers at the bottom, all the fine print that no one really reads, right? So all that gets picked up. So that was one hurdle that we found we had to overcome. So we had to color code all the disclaimers, which includes the risk and the negative tone that gets sort of captured in the back of the document. So then only the main body and the content could be picked up in the actual investor sentiment recording. So that was the first challenge. But I would say that think of it on a scale of 0 through 10, from most negative to most positive. And we found a way to program certain words to be picked up, because with the nomenclature within the pharmaceutical industry, say when it comes to talking about clinical trial results, certain words mean certain things when it comes to positivity or negativity. And all that, in addition to what AI already knows to be in terms of the English language and scoring tone and sentiment, all that gets picked up. Now, we have it all for Pfizer specifically, but if you think about some of the challenges of, say, the macro environment that the pharmaceutical industry has been going through over the past year, all of our peers are negatively impacted by the macro sentiment negatively at the same time. So I think it would be helpful for us to explore, in the same way that we explore, say, how our stock is performing against the S&P 500 after the day of earnings, by seeing how the sentiment is for all of our peer companies, to see if there's really a delta there with respect to Pfizer specifically. So that is one opportunity that we have, but that's how we're using the tool, because it's objective at the end of the day, right? If you ask my opinion, it's going to be probably a little bit more flowery and positive in tone when I'm talking to the ELT. But AI doesn't do that. It's going to give you the same standardized, objective sort of approach to judging the tone and the sentiment over time. And then you can just chart that out in a graphic in the IAM tool, in the homepage of the tool, over time, where you can see a graph of how the sentiment responding over time.
That's great. Yeah. And I think the investor sentiment is super helpful. And I know another thing that a lot of IROs that we speak to are trying to do with AI is also not only analyze the sentiment, but just topics and trends and things that are coming up in their meetings. And we heard from a lot of IROs who were basically saying, we have somebody on our team who is going through all of our meeting notes at the end of a quarter and trying to draw out common themes and topics that come up in conversation. And last year we released some functionality in Irwin that allows you to just do that within the platform and just goes across all your meetings and gives you a summary, either at the contact level or across all of your meetings. And I think that there are opportunities from both the sentiment perspective, but it seems like there's also this shift towards analyze all of my interaction information to help me understand the sentiment, as well as what are people's concerns, what are they asking the most about. And again, that goes into the earnings call prep as well. Michael, I want to switch over to you. A similar question to what I had asked Lex. What are some of the day-to-day tasks or processes that you're using AI the most for right now?
Yeah. Just to give a backdrop, I worked at IPREO and S&P Global in the global markets intelligence before joining the corporate practitioner side. And so one of the things I did for clients was to generate a summary of their peer earnings, right? That was super time consuming, and that was 10 years ago. I got really used to the process, but also felt like I got a really good understanding of what was going on within my clients' sectors every quarter. When I joined my current company, I brought that practice over, obviously, and was doing that initially by hand, but still reading through and understanding where to find information, I think is really important. And I think for junior people in IR, you might be well served to skip AI for a few quarters while you get the understanding of how you make the sausage, and then move to using AI to summarize things for you. Because in essence, like I think a lot of people have said this over the years, but this is a really good tool to act as an analyst, not as a high level decision maker or really even a director in their role as they're trying to analyze and give the best information to management teams. You need to know what you should be finding from this information before you can have somebody just tell you what it is. That said, I will use this regularly now for peer analysis, for, as you mentioned, going through our quarterly calls to determine what our likely top 10 questions for management would be based on what we know first week of earnings. And then obviously it evolves as we get more financial data in and the books are closed. But I think of that. And then the other thing that I've found particularly useful and very early on was to drop in conference fireside chat Q&As and reference all of our previous public documents to get the answers out of that. And again, I've been with the company for 5 years. The first 3, I was doing it by hand. The last 2, not by hand, and takes a task that's generally 8 hours down to about an hour. It's a good time save, but I really would encourage everybody listening, especially younger people, to get your craft before you start skipping into using the cheat code.
And Michael, just to be clear, like you're just using a company subscription to, is it to ChatGPT or to
Copilot is our
Copilot?
company, but
Okay.
I go across the platforms with public documents because risk associated there. And I like to see
Sure.
which ones will pick up what. I know our follow-up in the prep session was just what frustrates me. And I would say the frustration is that you put a question into 5 different platforms, you will generally get 3 or 4 different answers, and 1
Right.
or 2 of them will be good. And it doesn't necessarily come from the same platform every time. So I think mixing it up is good. I think, again, knowing what the response should be is really important. And then having that keen eye to distinguish where there's a hallucination or a misstatement is really important.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I asked a question on Copilot, and I think it's helpful to hear Lex also talk about Notebook LM. And Justin, you at Pfizer, you've taken an approach to building more of an internal tool. And I think what I'm taking away from this part of the conversation as well is like, there are so many tools out there now, and many of them are not that expensive, right? I think if you're talking about, we need to go out and buy 50,000 licenses as like an enterprise agreement, like, okay, that's expensive. But you know, I feel like we talk to a lot of IROs now who are, one, I don't know who said it, but this made a comment of, what do you already have? Like, I think a lot of the vendors that you're using today already have some of these AI solutions built in. And so you already have access to them. And it's not always going to be about, like, doesn't always have to be a big conversation about let's go out and ask for hundreds of thousands of dollars of budget to go and do these additional projects. And so it is becoming increasingly accessible, I guess would be the main point there. Tim, I want to come back to you because we've been talking a lot. Everybody's been talking a lot about AI. And then even more recently, it's more of a focus on agents and how agents can be used to help people automate workflows. And so that's the goal. And so we've been talking about that a lot with IROs and what they can do with agents. Would love for you to share some of the examples of where AI agents can be used in IR and some of the things that FactSet is thinking about and working on.
Yep. So when I think of workflows, I think of basically a series of tasks that have been stitched together. And what we're seeing agents do is essentially create comprehensive plans listing out discrete steps for that workflow. And I think the peer benchmarking or peer monitoring within earnings is a great one for all of us to relate to. Like there are a series of tasks that go into that job function. So essentially we should be able to upload our peers to an agent, and then that agent would start executing on several steps. First step, upload all of the events to my Outlook calendar, right? So that they're fully synced and I know when my peers are reporting. Ahead of earnings calls, please send me a preview outlining key topics to be aware of. What's consensus look like? What are questions that could be asked going into that call? As soon as the earnings release drops, start parsing key KPIs from that document and ideally upload them to my proprietary Excel file which I'm using for peer benchmarking. Once the transcript hits, extract key themes, and ultimately I have a running list or a dashboard that I'm using to monitor themes in my space. And ideally I see sentiment as well. Like how are my peers talking about particular topics and how is it resonating? Justin mentioned the sell side piece, the notes start coming in. What does sentiment look like? What's the estimate outlook? Where's consensus going? And so that's another task that an agent can do. After we have all of this information, create an executive summary for me with implications, right? And then send that to me and I can then forward it to senior management. So that's an example of a larger workflow that consists of multiple tasks. And what I've found so far is agents do a pretty good job of creating those plans, but I've found that users need to spend a lot of time fine tuning the individual tasks. But ultimately, FactSet's goal is to have these different workflow agents available to our users and they work out of the box. All you need to do is provide your peers or sign up for these workflow agents and you're ready to go. So definitely looking forward to that, Mark. And that's something we're actively working on.
Yeah, that's great. And I think one of the things that is good to note there, I think a lot of people, including myself, frankly, listen to talk about agents and that description that you just gave, Tim. That sounds awesome. It also sounds complicated. Am I going to have to set that up myself? That's tough. And I think your point is well made that facts and a lot of these AI focused companies are out there really trying to partner. That's Tim and I have spent a lot of time talking to IROs, trying to understand like, where can we help you? Because that just helps inform the products that we build so that it's out of the box. Yep. Nobody's having to go in and code and build their own agents. Yep. I want to go back to you, Justin, because Tim was just talking about earnings season. And in our prep call, you talked a little bit about earnings season and how your team is using, I think it was Copilot or another AI solution to prep for earnings season, looking over peer materials, real-time information sharing. Like maybe if you could walk us through a little bit of the work that you're doing for earnings prep, that'd be great.
Yeah. So for earnings prep, I think the impetus for starting the investor engagement model or tool was to help us better predict the questions that analysts would ask on the earnings conference call. And it did do that right off the bat. So we were around mid 80s in terms of our ability when it just comes to the IR team's ability to predict the questions and to actually prepare the ELT members who would be on the call with sort of a list of questions prioritized and racked and stacked so that they would come in prepared. We took that to the mid to upper 90s. You're never going to be 100%, but that was really the impetus for starting this tool. And we have so we continue to use it for that purpose. And of course, how do we inform the tool? You have to stay current and relevant. So you have to be able to, with all the content and all the meeting notes in the lead up to earnings, all the sell side reports in the lead up to earnings, you have to ensure that they're within a tight enough time frame that they're still fresh, still relevant, and not dated. So that is one thing that we do with just time stamping the information and ensuring that the documentation that we are including in our summaries, in our Q&A prep materials are still relevant and we're pulling from the correct sources. So that's one. And then right after earnings, it becomes a storm of just all the investor and sell side interactions and keeping up with all the real-time questions. And the way to do that, again, is with the rapid Q&A platform, which allows you to, in the middle of a conversation, pull information from, say, 200 pages of vetted materials from the company. Now, on to Tim's point, he mentioned more the peer analysis and consensus. We have our own consensus tools as well. We do leverage FactSet amongst others. But I do believe we have more of an opportunity as a company to really use AI to bring a better, more into scope, what our peers' reactions are, what their takeaways are, what they're saying on calls, and then better collate that. We tend to leverage our own internal competitive intelligence team for those types of reports. Just from a workflow perspective, it makes more sense. But I think if we could get AI to start to do that, maybe with an agent tool or something along those lines, we could look into that.
Awesome. That's great. Okay. And we've got few more minutes and then we're going to switch over to Q&A. And so if you do have a question, you want to put something in there, there's a Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom window and you can post your questions in there. We'll try and get them answered. Lex, I want to come back to you. In terms of using some of the tools that are available at Salesforce, curious, what have been some of the biggest challenges or frustrations for you when it comes to using Salesforce's own AI tools in your work?
Yeah, there are certainly things that work well and lessons to be learned along the way. So for context, in case anyone has not seen the wonderful Matthew McConaughey commercials that tell you everything about what our company does, around a year ago, we launched our first agents, which we call Agent Force. And the idea is Salesforce is doing AI for a decade, but Gen AI agents really takes it to the next level. So from an IR perspective, a year ago, we weren't really doing anything with AI. And then it was, hey, let's jump full force into Agent Force. And so I'm really glad in the intro, people talked about how the idea is think big, start small. That's exactly what we tell our customers. And that's how we want it to be. The thing I would add to it that I think is super important to remember is also think about the impact. What's actually going to be the most impactful? Where do you get the best ROI? And I think that was a bit of a lesson we learned where I would say there are 3 areas we have explored in terms of the type of agents you can have. So we started when you think about Salesforce being a CRM solution, largely customer facing. We wanted to start with that customer facing agent. So that is an IR agent that would be investor facing. So that was our idea. You feed it our materials and then investors can engage on our website. And what that brings up is, okay, that's cool to show the tech, but how impactful is that already? We've spent the last 40 minutes talking about the great tools that everyone's using, the tools that are actually made for investor information. And so what we found is when you think about that investor materials, that accuracy bar is incredibly high. And so that's challenging with any LLM. I know Michael talked about the 3 to 4 different answers. That's really not going to fly when you're thinking about having something on your website that's the source of truth for your investors. So that certainly made us pause. Like I would ask the agent about professional services costs and it would say, oh, Agent Force grew X. And I'm like, what? And the next time it would answer the correct answer. The other thing I would say is it's important to keep in mind that Gen AI is still incredibly early and innovating rapidly. So what might not work now might work in the long run. For example, one of the biggest things we ran into from an accuracy perspective is those LLMs at first were really bad at reading PDFs. And when you think about an earnings press release, the materials we're going to want to ingest, there's a lot of tables in there. And so we were getting inaccurate responses. Fast forward to now, the technology has evolved. They've improved their ability to read unstructured data. And so now that actually is highly accurate for us. That said, it still comes back to the impact. And so we haven't put that on our website because we're not sure about the impact. And when you think about the cost benefit, the risk of having that out there in the benefit. So with that, I would say switching from the customer facing, we thought about some that actually might give higher ROI. So think of an internal sales coach agent. We have that across our entire sales organization. We and I are salesmen too, right? And so it was a relatively easy plug to say, I want that for my CRM so that I get briefing docs to prep me for investor meetings. That's actually a lot of time we spend being like, oh, how has their position changed? Who met with them last? Do we have any meeting notes on it? So being able to have those might actually be more impactful. And then the final one I would leave you with is not actually our technology, but is another way that we're thinking about it. So you've got customer facing, you've got employee agents, and then you've got background agents. So what can be happening behind the scenes to make my day-to-day easier? And I'm sure you all feel this. I wake up in the morning and I've got hundreds of emails because some company said something and every sell side writes a report on it. So I've got 20 emails on the same topic. And so I set up a background agent with Gemini, and you can do it with Pick Your Provider, where every morning at 7 a.m., it gives me a recap. And I told it which sell side analyst I like the most. And I said, obviously, do it from a CRM lens, and I care most about my peers. And so it gives me and I told it how many characters I wanted it to limit it to. I don't want it to be super long. Give me a recap. And it's not perfect. It's not replacing checking my email, but it's great before I've had a chance to clear out my inbox. I know, okay, this thing happened in the markets. It's really hot today. Someone said this about Salesforce and someone said this about my peers. So I found that impactful.
It's great. And I've had conversations with a few IROs, and I feel like we get asked this a lot at FactSet around summarizing research. And it's a bit of a touchy area because all the different research providers have different answers, but you're talking about more like morning notes that you're getting from analysts. And so you're getting these summary of the morning notes. Do you forward those on throughout the company, or is that really just for your own use?
Today, it's just for my own use. It is an interesting thing to think about in the future, though, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I know, again, we've spoken to so many IRs that talk about, I get the morning notes and I get the research reports and everything, and then I summarize them and I send them out to the management team. And again, those things just take time. And so I think that's a great sort of easy use case. Thank you. On that note though, Tim, and then we're going to go to Q&A. There's been some talk about agents though, there's been this common thread throughout this panel of trust. And can you depend on these agents? Can you depend on these solutions? What do you think needs to happen before AI agents move from somewhat experimental, like Lex even talked about experimental, but not going to go on their IR website, to something that you could really trust to fulfill a full end-to-end process?
Well, trust is a really strong word. It's clear that everyone on this call is already getting a lot out of AI tools. So people should not hesitate to jump in and start taking advantage of what's available today. But Mark, I have my eye on 3 areas: accuracy, on like structured data, and then reasoning capabilities. We've already talked about accuracy a bit, right? Like Lex is reluctant to put an agent on their website that would interact with potential investors. Standard of accuracy is just too high there. And then Michael talked about getting various responses from different services. So there's still work to be done. And models, the LLMs do hallucinate. So double check your work. Please validate anything that's returned by a model, but it's continuing to improve. But accuracy is obviously at the top of the list. In terms of structured data, progress is already being made. Lex mentioned, like, you now have the ability to analyze tables within PDFs. That's a big step. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done for agents to take advantage of data across like disparate structured data sets. So think like linking financials to estimates for key revenue drivers for companies and bringing all that together to understand trends. There's still a lot that needs to be done, but confident we'll get there. And then lastly, reasoning capabilities. And what I mean by that is agents, AI tools do a great job of summarizing information and providing us with that information, but they have a harder time connecting the dots and answering the so what. Definitely possible, but many times it requires additional prompting. But just a simple example would be, okay, we're talking about peer benchmarking or monitoring. Agent comes back and says that one of our peers is guiding 4% this year for revenue. Okay, so what? Like going back, seeing that they've been guiding 4%, sandbagging for the past 4 years, or actually this is a pretty big step, would be helpful for us to know. And then along those lines, I would add predictive capabilities. So an example would be, how will our message be received by the sell side? Obviously, tough question to ask, but I think there's a lot that agents can do in that space. So I feel as these areas are addressed, agents will be more widely adopted. But in terms of like, when will it be good enough? I don't think we should sit around waiting for agents to ever be perfect. There'll always be something, but I feel like we're on the right track. But just three spots for everyone to keep an eye on as this technology continues to develop.
Yeah, I agree, Tim. It's funny, you and I were talking about this earlier, and we were saying, like, if I was an IRO or I'm on an IR team and we hire a new grad, you're not going to expect that new grad is going to get every answer right all the time. There's a learning curve that you need to go through. And I think in a lot of ways, AI is that way too. Like, it's still developing. You've got to work with it. You've got to teach it, fine tune it, but it'll get there. And then once it's there, it'll be super helpful. And so I think it's having realistic expectations for what some of these tools can do right out of the box. Awesome. So I really appreciate everybody taking the time to answer all of my questions. And you've all shared a lot of really helpful, actionable advice. I want to go over to the Q&A. And for everybody who's here, again, do not put your Q&A in the chat because it won't work anyways. I'm just putting the Q&A box. I'm going to start off with a question that I think is great because I'm surprised it actually hasn't come up in this meeting. Somebody's asking how you all use, or whether you use, AI to help with note-taking during one-to-one meetings. I think we've all been on like a Zoom call where some meeting assistant hops on the call and is like recording the meeting. Or even if you're like in an in-person meeting, are you ever recording notes on your phone using AI to transcribe them? So I'm curious, Michael, I know you'd mentioned that in our prep call. I'm just curious if that's something that you're doing today.
Yeah, I think there's there's definitely really good opportunities for that. I think larger companies tend to get away with these things first. And so I know some of my much larger peers have told me that they've been doing it for the last quarter or two. I've started to implement it into my kind of day-to-day meetings, in particular where I'm comfortable with the investor and have known them for a while. But then in like group meetings at conferences in person, yeah, I'll throw my phone out there and just record the whole thing because there's no way I'm taking fast enough notes and answering questions at the same time to get what we need for a note taking.
Great. Justin or Alex?
I would add on to that. So I would say from an investor perspective, we take a bit of a more conservative lens of there's nothing I'm recording there today. And even when I think about our guide meetings, our earnings prep meetings, we're not really recording those. But anytime we're having a tactical meeting, think we're prepping for an event or something, those are definitely recorded. And so as a result of that, you'll get this outline of here are the action items. And so it works really well for tactically. But it is interesting, an AI forward company and a company that knows how valuable data is, there still is a bit of that mental block of how do we feel about that being in a transcript. The other one that I would note is your communication tool for messaging. So much of the way we get stuff done now is via your messaging system. So I'm using Slack if others are using Teams. That has been a wealth of information for us, even when I think about not a true IRO thing, but the admin of it. It will prepare for me when I think about writing my kind of performance evaluation. What have I been working on? I ask Slack to like prepare me a summary and it'll go look at my stuff. And the fact that it understands your communication style, it knows the communications you've had, that can be really powerful to get the right message because it actually knows your voice.
It's a good point because there's always this conversation about how IROs spend so much of their time internally and cross-functionally, right? Going from function to understand what they're doing and speaking to some of the sort of like frontline people to understand what's happening in the business. And so I have to imagine there's a ton of opportunity for those types of tools internally as well. And so thank you for bringing that up. Justin, anything that Pfizer is doing as it relates to meeting, recording, and taking notes?
Yeah, we did experiment with recording a little bit, but internally, when you're having conversations, there's a little sensitivity to recording various, say, ELT members' conversations. That said, say, for instance, you have a Teams meeting that is open, right? It can very easily, using Copilot, record exactly who's saying what when. But from our perspective, does that really help us accomplish what we use IEM for? We leverage IEM for the questions that the investors ask. We don't necessarily need the answers that we are saying. So it would just create one more level of, I guess, dissection. You would have to dissect all the answers out to be able to use just the questions only, which is the heart of what we're trying to capture in the note taker, all the, say, 300 investor interactions we have every quarter. There have been challenges. So we basically ended up resorting back to the original traditional, just capturing note-taking of the questions only from the investors.
And Justin, somebody asked a follow-up question. Any particular service that you use to test that out? Was it Copilot or what were you using to do that when you tested it?
So I believe it was just through Teams only, because that Copilot with Teams, there's a collaboration there and it works together. So you can use them actively together at the same time in unison.
So you just record the Teams meeting and
you
then
have to be able to parse through all of the answers, and it becomes a task in and of itself.
Yeah. Understood. Okay. So you were just Teams meeting, record, get the transcript, summarize the transcript. So you're just using Teams for that. And Michael, are you also using Teams or anything else that we haven't talked about? You're muted.
Yeah, when it comes to using my phone, I'm literally just using the Samsung voice recorder. It's supposedly secure as well.
Tech. I like that. All right, great. Justin, an anonymous attendee asked whether investors feel awkward at times about you sitting in a meeting and rapidly entering in questions and answers into the rapid Q&A. I guess the question is that odd to people that you're like chatting with your laptop while you're in the meeting. People don't mind.
No, by and large, 80 to 90% of the questions are already baked into the fabric of what we already know as more seasoned IR professionals. It's those questions that are a little bit more nuanced, that get into the weeds, that are less often asked, that are required very specific going into the document. What we used to do before rapid Q&A became available just weeks ago was we would have to pause the meeting, see if they
Look it up.
were getting just that answer. And we would have to go through and use the Control F in a large 200-page PDF document. That's not very helpful. So ultimately, 5 to 7 seconds is a leg up.
Awesome. I should have mentioned this at the beginning, but Justin and his team at Pfizer won an award from IR Impact for best use of AI in 2025. And so, Justin, that's a great shout out for your team. And we're up on time. I did want to thank all of our panelists for participating today. They all took their time to do a prep meeting and prep their notes and share everything that they're doing with this audience. One thing I will say is that the IR community is always really great about sharing what they're doing and sharing insights with one another. And I'm not trying to voluntold any of our panelists, but you can always find them on LinkedIn. And if you have questions, maybe they're willing to chat with you. But again, thank you for taking the time today. Zane, any closing comments?
No, thanks again, Mark, for hosting this. We do appreciate it. Apologies again for the troubles we have with Zoom, but we really appreciate both your time as well as all of the panelists that joined. And we look forward to seeing many of you again at one of the upcoming either NERI San Francisco or soon to be NERI Bay Area chapter meetings. So see you then.
Great.
All right, thanks everyone.
Thanks everybody. Have a nice day.